Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where we discover the communities that are making a difference in the lives of others. Our self-discovery is something we are all making on our life's journey. Here you will find the people that will be your guidance, that will be your inspiration, that will be there for you in support on your journey of life. Do enjoy. Our next show is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Their Story Matters right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my guest today is Matt Rosenberg. He says, what's next for Chicago? These are notes of a pissed off native son. He lived here 30 years and then he moved away. And when he came back last year, he was very disappointed with what he saw. He said in the fall of 2020, amidst the riots, the looting, the alarming uptick in the senseless killings, he says that as a journalist returning to his native Chicago to see his city can dig itself out of the hot mess it's become over decades of liberal governments. It's broken. The urban progressive government badly undermines those who claim and claims to lift it. So, Chicago is known for many, many things. It's a city that is well loved. But yes, violence seems to be on the uptake, and it's something that one never wants to see one city go through. And having been away from it, living in Seattle, another great city, and then going back and seeing it, it's always when we go back that we see things in a different light, isn't it? And that different light isn't always the light that we want to see. Welcome to the show, love.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really nice to be with you. And it was quite a series of circumstances that led me to come back. 2020 was a remarkable year, quite clearly in the history of, let's say, North America at the very least. And watching what was going on in Chicago from my home in Seattle, the rioting and the looting, I felt that I had to go beyond the news stories. I wasn't really getting enough of the right information. And so toward the end of October of 2020, I moved back in, and I settled into Bridgeport, which may not mean much to your viewers, but I'll explain. That is the ancestral home of all of Chicago's Irish mayors, which number 5 and include the 2 dailies. And a lot of the city's history is packed into the neighborhood of Bridgeport. It's on the near south side of the city, and it was a good starting point from which to venture deeper into the south side, which is one locus of the Black population in Chicago. And there I went into people's homes and workplaces and literally asked them, what next, Chicago? Also, how did we get here? And while I'm here, tell me your life story. And so I found a lot that dismayed me, but I also found reasons for hope in some of those personal stories. And we can get into that later on.
When we just look blanket at something, we only really see the trouble. And we don't see the abundance behind it, because let's face it, news loves to sell all the discord. It doesn't give the good stories. But when you do go in and take the time and the respect to listen to other people's stories, yes, they may speak about the troubles, but it's the underlying enrichment that is there. If we brought that enrichment to the surface, maybe we wouldn't have so many troubles.
I think in a way that's precisely right, Sarah. I think that we need to literally ferret out success stories and support the people who are trying to live with what I call moral authority. And in a way, this project forced me to take stock of what really matters in life, because here I was trying to make sense out of, 769 murders in 1 year. Oops, sorry, it was 770. They updated the figures. 1,400 armed carjackings, which is a particularly horrible type of crime. You can imagine what it must be like as a victim.
Yes.
And that figure was some 130% greater than the number of carjackings in Chicago the prior year of 2019. So, and I think we all know what flipped the switch. Somehow, after the horrible and heinous death of George Floyd,
Yes.
under the knee of that Minneapolis police officer. But, you know, I think that in a way occasions a difficult but necessary conversation.
Mhm.
My own view is that it's entirely right to insist on dramatic changes in the way that police relate to suspects under pressure, and it's quite correct to insist upon a greater police accountability and really probity, if you will, and ethics in the way that they manage high pressure situations. But 2020 turned into a high pressure year all around.
Yeah.
And so one additional thing that struck me is, you know, if you are upset about police brutality or about what you might call economic injustice or any one of a number of other social problems, that is not a license to loot and riot and set fires and kill and shoot and maim and steal and cheat. And what we have had, sadly, is a breakdown of the social order. But then, too, how do politicians respond under pressure? And I have seen that, sadly, that our mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, a woman with actually a very impressive background, who campaigned as a corruption buster, who worked, it is interesting to note, as a federal prosecutor in Northern Illinois and Chicago, who actually put corrupt Chicago aldermen in jail as a federal prosecutor, someone who came in really having excited the electorate as finally a change, a breath of fresh air. Sadly, she went to pieces under the pressure as soon as the rioting and looting started, and everything has really gone out the window. Our public schools are still mired in failure. Our county court system, for which others answer more than the Chicago mayor, that is still a broken system with a revolving door for violent offenders that contributes greatly to the violence, which contributes greatly to people literally being afraid to come outdoors out of their houses. I mean, people say that.
Yeah.
And a number of other problems have persisted, including our endemic corruption, our rigged rules of governance, and our fiscal woes in our city government due to a staggering amount of public employee pension debt, which I know is an eye-glazing topic, but one which threatens the fiscal foundations of a number of our larger United States cities, including New York and Chicago. So we need a leader in any city like this, and I'm sure this goes for Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary. You need a leader of your city government, and you need a legislative body, a city council, that will not fold under pressure, that will not start to lose its collective mind, but rather will reach up for that something extra to a higher level. Sadly, in Chicago, we've seen just the opposite occur starting in late May of 2020. Everything went out the window, Sarah, and we're still struggling to regain our footing here in Chicago.
And it will be a while, unfortunately, when you get that violent cycle. You know, the violence goes like a tornado and gathers and gathers and gathers, and the eye for the eye until everyone's blind. You know, they don't realize it works. You know, that doesn't work. And, you know, and your mayor, obviously, in the platform that she was working in before, she excelled, but clearly didn't know how to deal with the other side of it. So instead of going to pieces, bring the people in that do know how. You know, this is the time to build a team. This is the time to have that collective understanding of what to do about something, not like, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with this, and in everything going to hell in a basket. You know, the pandemic in itself, obviously has been a crisis on its own, and then the reactions to it, and then reactions to George Floyd. We know that violence begets violence, but we also know, for many of us know, that the violence is not the answer, and that somewhere along the line, you've got a grief, I understand it, but let's try and find a way to communicate. We hear you. We understand why you're mad. We understand where the injustice was. We understand where that things have to change, but we're not going to change it by the gun or by the violence or by the robbery or by the looting. That just creates more problems. But also on the other side of it, these are people who don't know how to have the dialogue, and their reaction is just purely to be violent. And their frustration leads to that, and then they get caught up in that cycle of it, and it's a vicious cycle that then justifies itself. So somewhere along the line, everybody needs to take a deep breath and realize none of this is working, and we're willing to come to the table and start talking it out and seeing things from every angle to find a solution.
I agree. And there are a couple of things strike me in reaction to what you just said, Sarah. One is that it reminds me of the presence of a number of violence prevention groups in Chicago, which do good work and which have exhausted now their philanthropic funding and are turning rightly, in my opinion, to the city of Chicago and its budget process. One of these violence prevention groups, and it's not just a soundbite, they have wraparound social services in about 5 different areas, starting with street outreach ambassadors, then extending to personal counseling, job counseling, and educational counseling, and even job placement. And they do good work. They're not guaranteed of success, but we in Chicago should guarantee them of a chance to do their work.
Yes, give them the wind behind their backs, please.
Yes, and there's a price to that, which has been estimated in Chicago at about $150 million a year. Now, our city budget this fiscal year, the one ending now, is $12.8 billion. In that budget, the violence prevention groups as a whole got only 36 million. They estimate they need 150 million because there are 15 neighborhoods in Chicago, 15 out of the city's 77 neighborhoods. And we're very distinct about our neighborhoods here. They have clear boundaries, clear names, clear identities, and a lot of neighborhood pride in each neighborhood. There are 15 neighborhoods that are very violent and need a full-on violence prevention network operating each year. And the cost for each of those 15 would be about 10 million per year. That's how you arrive at 150 million. So this is an area that needs further emphasis. The city government should find a way to carve out some money sufficient to what's needed. But when you talk about the violence that's occurring, it also makes me think of the individual, the power and the role of the individual, and the idea of agency of the individual. Now, I'll call it a dime store psychological analysis, since I'm not a licensed psychologist. Young men are frustrated. Young men in Chicago exchange taunts. More than taunts, they exchange, very disrespectful raps, actually, and they post them on social media. It is sad to say that social media is very much at the heart of a good proportion of the violence in Chicago. And here's how it breaks down. There's a particular style of rap called Chicago drill, which is rather unfortunately named, if you ask me. And guys get up there and do raps and disrespect their gang rivals. And then what happens is the rivals literally come gunning for them, but they don't just go after the guy, they go to the block where the guy lives. And they spray the block, exactly, spray the block with bullets, and it's horrendous. This is how grandmothers sitting in their living room end up dead.
Yes. And the children on the street and everything. Yeah, it's like, it's almost like, cutting off the arm to despite oneself. People don't realize they are hurting themselves. This is,
Yes.
it's like, is this working for you? If you stopped and asked every one of them and say, is this working for you? Or so kill so and so, and then you went and killed them, and then they're retaliating against you. Is this system working? Now, a lot of them don't live long enough to even know whether it's working or not, but there are always what I call the shoot stirrers that are capitalizing on this in some form or other, right? That it's in their interest to keep these people at each other. And when you talk about this community that's going around and helping, when are we going to see the police working with the social workers and the organizations coming together where the police have got their back and the resolution isn't shoot first and ask questions afterwards? That, if we could see the police as being something more peaceful instead of more threatening, we take away that expectation that the moment they see me, they're going to kill me, and I have no voice. And where the police are seen working with this organization, we're here to make sure that it doesn't go wrong. We're here as support, and we want to change this whole environment. But I think what happens in the cycle of this violence is they've stepped out of heart, because you can't knowingly go and hurt another out of spite or out of this, out of that when you're in heart. They've stepped out of heart. They've stepped into bitterness, and they're so caught up in this belonging to the gang, that a sense of belonging, and that you're hurting my territory, I'm going to hurt you. And they don't realize, they don't know how to break that cycle. They don't know how to come together in peace. And if anybody steps up and says, is enough, let's have peace, boom, let's take you out of the equation. So how do you just put a blanket over the whole thing of it and say, calm down, mates, this isn't working. You've become the murderers that you say you're against.
Indeed. I think part of it goes to willingness to adapt and innovate. I know that sounds odd, but when I think of a young man whose sense of self-worth is so fragile that a disrespectful video posted to Twitter or Instagram is enough to rock his own world into chaos, I think that young man believes that he lacks possibilities for the future. That, in other words, if he allows himself to be dissed, and that is the term, right? If he allows himself to be dissed by a gang rival, his world will fall apart, so he must respond with force and authority. And as you say, there is no future in that. Eventually, it will catch up with you.
You'll all be dead.
Yes. And, right now, there's so many layers here, though, I have to tell you. Among the good news stories that I uncovered was that in one neighborhood of Chicago called Pullman, where they used to build railroad sleeper cars starting back in the late 1800s, George Pullman, the Pullman sleeper cars, very famous. That neighborhood then went downhill economically by the middle of the 1900s and was very hard hit economically. They had a comeback there with a big economic redevelopment project, but one of the big pieces was a micro lending program by an organization called the Chicago Neighborhood Initiative. And Black ex-convicts are increasingly getting loans for $20,000 or $40,000 a pop to buy one or two Sprinter delivery vans. And one of the companies that has come into the new industrial park there on redeveloped steel mill land, a shut down steel mill, is Amazon with a huge distribution center. Now, I know it's very popular for some people to bash Amazon, never minding the convenience and the fact that most of us shop there, some of us almost incessantly. And what we've seen is that a lot of people are finding a new life, even ex-convicts working long hours, admittedly very long hours, running their own companies, their own delivery services, feeding off the Amazon distribution centers, which are popping up all over metropolitan Chicago.
Good.
And here's the thing though, in 10 years, if the soothsayers are right, those delivery vehicles may be outmoded and drones will be making the final miles delivery. Let's suppose for the sake of discussion that might happen, right? Well, then it becomes important to, for instance, know how to operate a drone panel. And that takes you right back to education,
Yes.
technology, lifelong learning, and training. And so this is my own roundabout way of saying that those young men who think their world depends upon responding to an insulting video really do need to step back and think about the bigger picture and skills acquisition, long-term economic life, and so forth. And I think the parents have to play a role here. And there's a whole nother discussion I won't launch into now, but I'll end this by saying vocabulary acquisition is something that is utterly, utterly crucial in terms of basic intellectual and educational development. And we know this. There have been plenty of articles and educational science research. The more words that a parent can introduce into a toddler's life, the more the toddler's mind will grow. And when parents don't do that, and when they're largely absent, and when there is no father in the home,
right,
when 4/5 of births to Black women in Chicago are to unmarried women, and that was the case for 11 years when the city measured that data, there's a problem when that happens. And so
there's another problem that is very statistic of America, that I don't know how far back this goes, but 70% of those incarcerated are foster children.
Oh.
And
really?
If you look at that, these are the children that are taken away from the single mothers. These are the children where the parents have neglected their children. For me, it's always about, why are we not putting the time and money in the families, in helping them be better parents? Have the job, the roof over their head. What do they need to know in raising this child, instead of them trying to navigate it without the information, and the child's abused or neglected or this or that and taken away. And we know about the foster care system. I've done quite a number of shows on it, on how bad it can be. And these are the children that then turn to the gangs for a sense of belonging, because the gang would go, come on, I'll look after you, you belong here. And then next thing you know, gun put in the hand, you've got to go and prove yourself by going killing someone to be a part of the gang. So, they're just wanting to belong, a family, someone to care and love them. And then, the illusion of the gang doing that and then turning them. So let's look. I have an entire series of, the Forgotten Children series, which is about the way we raise our children is the way we're going to see our adults. And we don't put enough time in our children. And a lot of that comes economics, where they can't afford, two parents are working or working several jobs. Who's looking after the kid, right? Where is that time in raising a child? And the lack of support as a whole family, or even as a community, raising those children, where if you don't have a spouse or another partner there, that the community can step in and be there. In my day, the community looked out for you, and they also called you out on things, right? And we don't see that now, because everybody hides behind the doors out of fear. So we need to step outside of those doors, and we need to, as a community, go, we don't want this problem. So let's get to the children and the families when they're young and prevent it there, because your gang leaders are, very smooth talkers, and will take those children that don't feel they belong and entice them in. The next thing you know, they're caught up in a world they can't leave.
I'm continuing to do interviews, and just yesterday was speaking to a news source, a woman who grew up on the South Side, and she made that very point, Sarah, that back in the day, and she's 48 now, so when she was growing up in the 1980s, in a very tough neighborhood called Englewood.
Mm.
Englewood was the neighborhood that inspired Spike Lee's movie Chirac, which is an eye-opener, that the neighbor ladies, the older ladies, she said, Miss Lula, Miss Jane, if they saw you misbehaving, they would smack you.
Yes.
They would smack you. And there was no hesitation amongst parents or older neighbor ladies or even older siblings to whoop your ass, as I was told. It happened. And, last fall, when I was on the South Side, I was talking to a young Latino man in his late 30s, married with 3 children, working hard, holding the family together. And he said to me something very similar. He said, Mexican families in Chicago, boy, the kids get yelled at a lot. If you mess up the 3rd time, you're going to get a whooping. And he said, when you're a kid and your parents tell you, I'm doing this for your own good, you think it's a load of bull. But when he got older, he realized that it was important. And it
was putting the kid on the straight and narrow, right? Letting them know there were consequences for their actions.
Exactly, consequences. And the thing is, now in our criminal justice system, it's very hard to find the right balance. I think that I find myself sympathizing a little bit with some of the progressive judges and prosecutors who are coming from a place where they believe, first and foremost, that time spent in the prison system only makes young men more hardened, right? They make more connections.
Learn to be a criminal.
Yeah, they make more connections. And when they come out, they just get deeper into it. I understand that problem. On the other hand, they've gone too far in another direction, which is now we have something called bail reform, which has gone totally south. It was intended to provide for release of nonviolent first-time offenders on low cash or no cash bail. You would not have to pay $10,000 to get out before trial. You might only have to pay $500. If you're a first-time nonviolent offender, that's fine. But if you're a repeat offender and you're let out easily, what you do all too often in Chicago is you go and commit more of the same crimes.
Right.
If you're a carjacker and they let you out on low cash or no cash bail, all too often these young men go out and do more of the same before they've even faced trial on the first charge. And it's really reached a rather chronic state.
Yes.
So that's a really big problem here.
Right. I mean, they're too soft, and in jail they're too hard. There's I think it was Norwegian jail where they talk about they rehabilitate the criminals. They look at what their aptitudes are. They go through, psychological things, and they help them build a career so that when they do come out, they're actually going to then be productive in society, ready to go and immerse into society. Where we see, as you said, the whole defense in jail is that they don't get raped or they don't get murdered or don't get shanked. And, that needing someone to protect you, because the fear of the gangs in there, and it teaches them to be either better criminals or shut down altogether, and they come out ill-equipped to get back into society and be productive. So we there with the one side, they're too soft, and on the other side they're not doing enough in that rehabilitation, so that when they do come back into society, they can contribute, because every single one of us on this planet is meant to contribute to the well-being of humanity and all life on this planet.
There's a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago called Woodlawn. It's just south of Hyde Park, where I grew up, near the University of Chicago. And there's a pastor there named the Reverend Corey Brooks, and New Beginnings Church and a nonprofit he runs called Project Hood, which stands for Helping Others Obtain Destiny. And I write about Pastor Brooks in my book. He's doing some great things. One of them is that this summer, 18 Black women graduated from a training course as electricians, which is fantastic. He's also running a construction industry training program for young men and women. That's been going on a long time. He runs parenting classes. He's trying to raise $25 million through his 501c3 nonprofit for a community center that is mostly a job training center for auto mechanics, for construction industry workers, and for hospitality industry workers. It would include 3 restaurants. And this would be on the site of a hotel formerly, notorious for prostitution and drug use. In 2011, Pastor Brooks decided to camp out on the roof of this hotel, which is across the street from his church, until he could raise $500,000 US to buy the property and tear it down. He succeeded with the help of his congregation. And now the next step is to build something that endures on that very site. And that's where the community center and job training center would come in. So I had a chance to sit down with him at length and talk to him about his life and his path to this sort of social activist ministry. And he sought it out. He sought out a church in a neighborhood that was experiencing a lot of trouble, trial, and tribulation. And he's been making a world of difference. So this was one more uplifting story. And there were others as well.
Yeah. And the thing is, there are people out there that are willing to step up. Sometimes they just need a leader. I need people who can come in and do that. I can do that, and invite them in, because ultimately we are all responsible for what goes on in our community. And if there is violence there, then how are we going to turn the violence around? What turns the violence around? Everybody's looking for a meaningful purpose. Everybody's looking to belong. Everybody's looking for that economic structure that gives them a roof over their head, food in their stomach, and dignity, right? And if we can offer that, then that is a way away from the gangs, away from the prostitution, away from the violence, because there's so much more being offered to them than what is currently being offered to them. So it is an investment not only for the city to do, but investment for the community to do. And say, yes, I want to get behind this. I want to be a part of it. I want to, support it, because the way out of the violence is to actually give people an option where they can have self-dignity, meaningful purpose, and a sustainability in their lives. If we don't offer that, they're going to be angst, or they're going to be frustrated, or they're going to be enticed to the other side of the world. And that other side of that world is violence.
I agree. And I think a good piece of this also has to do with how we manage public education in cities like Chicago. And let me try and give you a quick overview of the problem here and some of the solutions which are arising. The problem is pretty straightforward. The Chicago K through 12 public schools on the whole have very dismal performance indicators. Only about 1/4 of students are meeting national standards on the key tests. And so the question becomes, what are the alternative approaches to your standard plain vanilla public schools? One alternative has been what are called public charter schools. The teachers' unions do not like them. The charter, I think you know this, refers to sort of an operating manual, a statement of principles and methods. The teachers do not have to belong to the teachers union. The school day can be 3 hours longer. the school year can be 2 months longer. It's the schools make their own rules and frankly often set the bar higher. For minority students, for Black and Latino students in Chicago, they and their parents have flocked toward charter schools. The enrollment figures for charter schools have grown more than 50% in the last 10 years, while the overall enrollment for Chicago public schools, which is predominantly regular public schools of various types, has continued to plummet. It went down again this year at the beginning of the year. People are voting with their feet and leaving. So one other piece of the solution set is private schools. And interestingly, here in Illinois, as in 28 other US states or territories, we have essentially a public subsidy for private schools. Now, to some, this sounds heretical because it would seem to violate the separation of church and state, right? If you're getting a public subsidy to send your kid to a Catholic school, some people would say that's not right. But this has been tested in the courts time and again. And so you end up with many states doing this either directly through something called school vouchers or through a state income tax credit. So here's the deal in Illinois. If you, as a private citizen, decide you want to give $1,000 or $10,000 to invest in kids, you will get a 75% tax credit on your state income tax payment. And Invest in Kids is a program set up by the state of Illinois where the money is funneled into a good organization, a scholarship granting organization that then shovels the money out to deserving recipients, mostly low-income minority students, and gives these families money for the children to go not to the Chicago public schools, but instead to go to a Catholic school, a Muslim school, a Jewish school, or an independent private school. And the kids love this. So we have a 5-year pilot program. It needs to be turned into a permanent program. There are other solutions too, which include homeschooling, which has grown from 3% to 10% of the populace in the United States, of the student population. There's even something that arose during COVID called micro schools, which is a whole nother thing. So there are alternatives, and it's not just about this stale battle we end up in sometimes here in the States, this great controversy over public charter schools, which are a real flashpoint because the teachers union and their defenders are so opposed to them. But we have to do better on public education is my broader point.
Right. You know, when we look at technology, it literally day by day, it's advancing at such a huge scale, and our young people can adapt to it very quickly. Most of our teachers can't, you know, because it's how do they keep up to it? You know, why are we not teaching the kids where they're at? And I mean, where they're at is where they're at with the technology. How can this, well, let's face it, in the future, there are going to be more technical jobs out there than other jobs. So why are we not teaching our kids, you know, the interest in technology, the advancement in technologies? Why, you know, I see an awful lot of schools have stopped doing the, sorry, the word is here, it's not coming out, but, you know, training on the job type thing. What's the word for that? Do you know what I mean? I'm there, I can't get it, I'll come out in a moment. But you know, where the schools can do mechanics, can do this, that, etc., where they actually are getting training for a job of interest, where they can try it out. You know, take a course in the school. I really am interested in that. I'd like to go further with it. Or no, this isn't for me. I'm going to try something else. But everything is about these certain grades, and it's an old-fashioned way of teaching, and we're not engaging our children because it's archaic in the way that we're teaching them. We're not teaching them something that they're going to use or want to use 5 years, 10 years, or whatever from now. We have to meet them where they're going to be in 5 years. And technically, we need to really get that in there, in that training. And have them experience different types of careers firsthand to find out whether it's something that's a fit for them. Because they go off to, if lucky, if they go off to university or college, and very often they go, oh, well, that's, that sounded good, but it's not really for me. Why can't they have the experiences through school themselves? Participation in something.
Couldn't agree more. One of the things we have here, and I'm sure there's corollaries to this in all other advanced modern nations, here they call it career and technical education. In other words, you may not be going to get a bachelor's degree in biology, or a master's degree in chemistry or into pre-law or pre-medicine in college after high school. Maybe you're actually most interested in becoming an auto mechanic, or a phlebotomist, for example. There are whole high schools, vocational high schools, that will put you on track for these kinds of jobs. But some interesting things have been observed. Mastery still of math and reading are crucial.
Yes.
And the Chicago Public Schools actually convened an expert symposium with some people from Harvard and elsewhere. And what they found was, for example, you need a second-year college reading level to be an auto mechanic, because you have to read so much of the manuals in order to know how to repair different models. And, there's all kinds of stuff involved
even
now.
the computer science nowadays in the car, right? Yes.
I was going to say electronics and even computers, because that's how automobiles are these days. So mastery of the basics still matters, but more than that, what a number of people within the Chicago public school system said at the time of this symposium was what they are hearing from employers too is that a lot of young people are coming in lacking the soft skills needed in employment. And this is stuff that sounds very basic, and some people might be surprised to hear it. But what school officials were hearing from employers was that too many young people are coming in not understanding the importance of punctuality, of how they dress, of looking people in the eye, of knowing how to shake someone's hand, even, basic human relations in the workplace. A lot of kids / young adults are missing this component. And
the social
and
skills,
employers say, if they had that, we could work on the rest. We could work on the skills piece. But you can't come in uninterested in the most basic stuff.
No. And what the word I was thinking of is apprenticeship. One of the things that we could teach in this skill in the schools is social interaction. I've done numerous shows on relationships, whether it's relationships in business or in, spouses or children. Every single thing we do is a relationship, first with self, and then that self that we bring to the relationship with everybody else. If you have people that are constantly on the defense and in your face, man, why should I? That lack of self-respect, that disconglomerated relationship with self is going to be what you are putting out to everyone else. It's the reflector. So they don't realize the harm they're doing themselves. Like, I don't need to do that. I'll do it if I want to. And that's where they've got, when they don't realize the repercussions of that down the road. Now, if right from the word go, from kindergarten, from home, from preschool, we could teach the thing of respect, listening to one another, truly hearing one another, respecting the differences, how to actually speak to one another and care for one another, then that becomes kind of the standard that people will grow up in, of actually being interested in other people and interested in putting their best foot forward. But we don't teach that. We don't teach that. What happens is becomes the teacher's the damn phone, right?
Funny you should mention that, because what you were saying was making me think of several things. One was the need in the end to limit social media usage
Mm-hmm.
by children to learn to relate to people
Mm-hmm.
the old-fashioned way. Another thing that this was making me think of was reading
Yes.
books rather
And
than
writing.
reading your smartphone.
Yeah,
Writing.
exactly. But how many people
Yeah.
today, kids, don't know actually how to put pen in paper together? They don't know how to write.
Oh, it's fairly chronic. I mean,
Yeah.
one greatly risks sounding like an old fogey, because
Sounded again.
there I go again.
Yeah.
Kids these days, my gosh, they can't put a sentence together. And
No,
yeah, it's
everything is an
true.
emoji talk.
Yeah. And I mean, you're instantly going to sound like somebody's old geezer grandpa. But you know what? I don't care. I'll be that guy because it matters.
Yes.
And my father was a university professor, and even back in the 70s and 80s, he was appalled at the inability of students, and these are students at the University of Chicago, let's be clear, which, could not put a coherent sentence or paragraph or paper together. Their mastery of the English language was virtually nil. So I'd say we've got a problem there.
Yeah.
And it's
but this is where, they kind of they've come to worship the celebrities. But what we're seeing is an awful lot of celebrities are now taking on the responsibility and saying, this may be my fame, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I have mental disorders, or I have problems, or I have this or that. And, I want to respect one another. And the thing is, they're idolized, but therefore they have that responsibility to represent. And we're seeing so much more talk on things like depression and anxiety, things on the struggles that I had to get here. We're seeing so much of that dialogue, which then gives permission to other people to start having the conversation. And so the more they are subjected to that, the more they're going to be able to find a way to articulate. And one of the problems with cryptic talk, emoji talk, is that it's an abstinence of really being able to speak how you feel.
I think you're right. And I think that's a very positive development. I think, and this is shifting the topic just a little bit, but I don't want to leave out the importance of good governance in our cities. I think that the northern cities in the United States are the old line cities, the ones that were industrialized in the early part of the 19th century: New York, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, and they're losing right now. They're losing out to places like Jacksonville, Florida, Dallas, and Phoenix, Chattanooga, and Nashville. These are the places where everyone is moving, including Iowa and Utah, because taxes are lower, the streets are safer, the schools work, and the court systems work. I'm very concerned, Sarah, about the lack of civic engagement in Chicago. And when you look at a city where the registered voter turnout in local elections is 33%, that's all.
My God.
It is shocking. I went back and checked the data from the official city records, and I compared it to how that same electorate turned out during presidential elections. And that very same batch of voters from just within the city of Chicago, 70% of them show up to vote in our presidential elections. Now, you may ask, why that big gap? Part of it is people are more interested in presidential elections than local elections, but here's another reason. The city elections are held in odd-numbered years in February and April of the year, whereas our presidential elections are, a big deal every 4 years in an even-numbered year. So I think we need to change the scheduling of our city of Chicago elections, and in Illinois, we would have to do that through state legislation, but that goes to a larger issue. The revolving door in local crime is due to judges who make poor decisions. Well, we elect our judges here and in most places, and we need to pay closer attention in cities like Chicago to who it is we're electing. As judges, do they believe that, a serious crime deserves serious punishment or not? Because what we see now, and I have to tell you how bad it's gotten, criminals are acting with impunity. There are bands of organized shoplifters who go into nice stores, beauty supply stores, high-end boutiques, often downtown now on Michigan Avenue in our high-end shopping area, and they clear off the shelves of designer handbags or beauty supplies. They're captured on videos. The security guards do nothing. And because their net take is under $1,000 US, they're not prosecuted. Right. Our prosecutor decided that. We have much worse stuff happening. We have this carjacking pandemic in Chicago, and now they use the carjacked vehicles to commit other crimes. Yeah. So we have armed robbery crews jumping out of cars downtown, robbing tourists and city dwellers of their phones and wallets and more. Some carjackings turn into murders very quickly. The shootings seem to never stop. So we have to elect a better class of officials, but when only 1/3 of registered voters are even showing up, I would say we need a bottom up.
Well, there's two things I want to address there. One is if people aren't turning up, then clearly the officials aren't doing their job. And what we see time and time again is the officials, it's more about the people who are wanting to put them in place, the lobbyists, and we're seeing faces talking, but we're not believing the action. Because what we're not seeing is those, people representing their community, being community people and speaking to the community kind of a lot of the time becomes the ego. So if you do have somebody that really is really wanting to make a difference and be connected, they've kind of been clumped together along with everybody else. I just don't believe you. The other thing I think that is huge, and it's something that has to be addressed in America, why are the rights to have guns bigger than the rights of lives? The gun situation has to be dealt with. Nobody should have access to an AK-7. Why are these people so easily getting hold of guns? Why is that security guard not going to do anything? Because most likely he'll get shot if he steps up, right? So we have we have the gun situation that is huge and a Pandora box, and most certainly has to be dealt with, because people without guns find it harder to kill. To shank someone or to stab someone or to kill someone with your bare hands is a totally different thing than just taking out a gun and going brrr. But the other thing is, if you want people to be elected, then they've got to be more electable.
On the guns, I think sadly the supply is not going to cease. Chicago police are taking away thousands of illegal guns from suspects over the course of a year, and it's important work. It probably reduces the number of shootings and killings significantly, but the hard part is that the supply chain just never stops. There are no ships stuck off the coast of Long Beach with guns, that's other consumer goods. And they just keep coming. I also learned yesterday, talking to this woman from the South Side, a new interview that I was doing. You know what's going on now? People are building their own guns at home. You 3D. Can buy the parts. Yeah. There's 3D printing, but they're not even doing that. That takes a little bit of money to have a 3D printer. But people are ordering the parts one by one through mail order, and surprise, surprise, there are videos on YouTube.
Oh, of course.
Explaining how to do this. So, human ingenuity, such as it is, arises up no matter what the challenge. And so to me, this may be an old-fashioned take, I think in the end, it does go back to the individual. How do we raise our children to
Yes.
begin with?
Yes.
And I have
The
to tell
community.
you, yeah, personally, I do not own a gun, although honestly, I've thought about it since coming back to Chicago. I have my own way of getting by on the streets, which is to look at tough guys straight in the eye and nod once, acknowledge them and show respect.
Right.
And I've found that it works remarkably well. However, I'm not in a rival gang.
Mm-hmm.
And being a white man of a certain age, they can probably tell that I'm not somebody who's about to get all up in their business. But I think that what you really have to do is remember that many people do own guns here in the United States and are extremely responsible with them. They never use them in an unintended way. And so I think more than call for greater restrictions through the law on gun ownership, it is more a question of how people are raised and what sorts of values they have to begin with. A gun in the hands of a bad person can turn into a deadly weapon. A gun in the hands of a well-raised, respectful person is not so much a problem, and in fact may save somebody's life. So
well, it goes back to the root of the problem. And that's how we raise our children. It goes back to the economic problem. It goes back to the color of the skin. It goes back to, the culture thing. And if we could recognize all these cultures, it doesn't matter, black, white, pink, yellow, polka dot, who cares? It's you're a human being. And how are we going to treat each other? And if we can teach our children right from the word go to respect the differences of each other, to listen and learn about those differences, right? And why they're different from yours, to be open in conversation, to value life above all, value their own life, and learn to step into not only the love of self, but the love of life and their contribution to it, and to realize that it doesn't matter what age you are contributing. You have got to contribute. This is the contribution is our license to live on this planet. It's part of your community. Whether you're just on the corner as an old person smiling at everybody going by or sharing a story, that's contributing. Even a baby contributes when they smile and giggle and make everybody else smile and giggle around them. But if we don't teach that respect, if we don't teach the art of communication, if we don't teach self-value, then we're never going to reach that love vibration, which is the one where we can't really harm anybody else. We're going to constantly create this spiral problem, which is only going to get worse.
I agree. I think of a guy named Daryl Smith. I met Daryl Smith last year when I came back to do this book. He served 3 years at the age of 18 for involuntary manslaughter. He was driving a car when some bad stuff happened. When he came out, he faced a fork in the road, and he chose the straight life and went to work. And now he's a 51-year-old Black man living in Englewood on the South Side, and he owns 10 residential properties. He's run tow trucks. He's worked at flea markets. He learned about that from his father, buying used goods, refurbishing them, and reselling them. He sings the gospel of opportunity. He says, if you can't make it in Chicago, you can't make it anywhere. He talks about his grandfather who came up from the deep South, from the Mississippi Delta, had only a 6th grade education, but turned into a property magnate of a sort in the neighborhood. He was not a fancy man. He worked in the steel mill. He came home at night, took a bath. His wife put dinner on the table, and then he went out to repair furnaces and boilers in neighbors' houses. He invested his money in something called an annuity. Although he only had a 6th grade education, he knew about that, saved his money, and he found over time that people in the neighborhood wanted to sell their apartment buildings. And so he started buying them. This was back in the day before there even were realtors. And he bought a number of them. And then Daryl's father did the same thing. So at a certain point, Daryl inherited some wealth and he created more wealth of his own. And now he owns 10 apartment buildings each, 2 or 3 units, up to 6 units for some of them. He could move to the suburbs into a large fancy house, but he prefers to stay in Englewood. But, I got to thinking, because if it were a white guy who had inherited a whole bunch of properties, we would be throwing around the phrase, some of us here in Chicago, the phrase white privilege. So I had to stop and ask myself, let me see, does my friend Daryl benefit from Black privilege? And some people would say there could be no such thing. Here's what I concluded. He benefits from a family's life well lived.
Right.
And that's what we want. Well, what we all want.
Somebody who really participated in their community, right? And that's the thing. Wherever you're living, this is your patch, your home, right? You want it to be peaceful for your children. Our generation played out in the street, right? We would go home at dark, and we could ride our bikes anywhere, and we didn't have to worry. Nowadays, we don't want to open our front door for our children. We have to keep an eye on them all the time. And it's like, no, we want to, that is a value. It's not going back to, the dark ages. It's going back to that kind of value where we know the community is looking out for each other's children, that we're not worrying about sexual offenders or gang leaders or, anything else out there, or bad drivers or drive-by shootings and all of that. The only way we're going to cure that is that if everybody steps up and says, enough is enough, what is the solution? How do I get behind it? And how do we all participate in the cure of the problem and not just moan about the problem?
Indeed. And that transfers over to the political realm. We suffer also.
But hang on a second. Don't the political always mirror the community? If the community says, I want this, I'm doing this, then the government goes, well, this is working, let's adopt it. So very often, I think the community is the one that tells the government what we need. It's now up to the damn government to listen to the community.
The two are intertwined. And we had a saying here in the olden days of the 1960s, the personal is political, right? So if people are engaged at the community level, at the family level, and as parents, you will end up with a better politics in your locality because the investment is already occurring.
Yes.
If people are more engaged as parents, they will more likely vote.
Right.
But you still need some sort of overarching plan in a place like Chicago. We need here, in my opinion, a rebranding of a reform party. We have nonpartisan.
I think you need it across the country, quite honestly, across the world. Politics has got out of hand. It really has.
Very much. But then what does reform mean? That would be the great debate and dialogue. Here, I think it means it means a lot of things. It means getting a handle on the $170 billion our city will owe pensioners over the next several decades, with virtually none of that money secured. So they are raising our taxes and fees dramatically, causing a Black and white exodus from the city. It means committing to more foot patrols by the police instead of having them just ride around in their cars. You talked and only show up after a crime is committed.
Or bring out the guns the moment they're there instead of, being the community cop. Yeah.
Yes. You talked earlier about the need to rebuild trust between police and the community. And I agree, that's a huge priority. I think that if cops are out on foot patrol on a regular basis, particularly in the most high crime neighborhoods, they begin to be seen as human beings. And the people in the community, conversely, begin to be seen more by the police
Yes.
as human beings rather than just as suspects and victims,
And
right?
converse. They learn to converse with each other.
Yes.
The police get
Yes.
to know what the community needs, and they can take that back to the politicians, right? And what the community needs. We're not listening to each other.
No. And solving crimes, right? Getting the tips that you need. People are notoriously loath to provide information to police in cities like Chicago when they see the gunman pull the trigger.
Yes.
Or they see the armed robber commit the robbery. They will not share that information with the police because they fear retaliation.
Yes. Yes.
That's a deep problem. I can't
Yes.
say I have an easy solution
No.
to that one right now, but I can say that if police are out there doing foot patrols regularly in the most high crime neighborhoods, they can start to build relationships that in the long run will help them solve more crimes. Because we have a very bad problem here. It's not just that we have a lot of crime, we have a lot of unreported crime.
Yeah.
And then a great proportion of all of the crime is unsolved.
Right.
Right.
And that
so
builds bitterness and revenge and everything else. It's always a vicious cycle. You know, the thing is, we like to point a finger at the government. Well, the government should do something about it. Well, there's three fingers pointing back at us. No, the community and the governments need to work together. Right? We elect the government to represent our needs. But how do they know what we need if we're not paying attention to what we need and communicating with the government? If the government needs to listen to what the community needs, and the community needs to know it's not all up to the government, we have to participate too. This is a partnership. And it can't be about ego in the government. It can't be about power. It can't be about who's buying you. It's got to be, you are working for your community. You are an employee. You're here in service of that community. Know your community, and community step out and communicate with your government and start looking together how you can resolve these issues. If you don't come together, then it's always going to be discombobulated.
Too often here in Chicago, it is about power and who's buying you.
Yes.
There is an art of compounding political power here. Once you get elected for a certain type of official, the objective becomes to retain and grow your power.
Yeah.
And that's really the be all and end all of your existence as a politician. And then you find yourself consorting with, contractors and vendors, the same people who are giving you campaign contributions. And I have to tell you, it sounds cynical, but failure is the success strategy for the political class of Chicago, because the more they fail, the fewer people show up to vote. And the ones who do show up are those who benefit.
Yeah.
They are members of the public employee unions who benefit from continuing pension payments that we're going into hock governmentally to pay for. And they are the employees of large contracting firms who get sweet deals from their insider friends in government.
So we actually had to change how the whole electoral thing is done. Like, in England, it's capped at a certain amount of money. So therefore, they can't be bought. Special interests can't go in there. So let's look at the entire electoral, premises there and go, okay, no, people can't come in and contribute and buy you, because we know when they're putting a whole load of money behind someone, they're buying them, right? So if we take that out of it altogether, and then maybe it's only the community funds that are behind people, and it's capped at a certain level, we're not going to receive ridiculous 700 or 1,000 million for one election, right? Which is ridiculous. That money could go back into the communities and go back into the pension funds. Cap it, keep the lobbyists and the special interests out of it, and let it truly become a community thing. You'll get more people voting again.
It's a thought. That's been a very robust debate here in the States. And there are caps in some cities. At the federal level, there was a huge legal case, which basically was decided in favor of the fat cats. Our country's highest court ruled that it would be an unfair limitation on their freedom of political expression to bar them from, well, that's it. Campaign money is speech,
Yeah.
right? Campaign money is political speech.
It's only for
That is
those who can
essentially,
afford to put the money into the campaign. What about everyone else?
yeah, some people can afford to speak more than others.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not good. In an
No.
ideal world, we would have, in my view, and this would inflame many of my conservative friends, we would have publicly funded campaigns only, no
I agree with
private
you.
funding.
I agree
Yeah.
with you 1,000,000%. Yes.
And
That's the only way you're going to get really the people that are really wanting to do the work be there.
yes, and term limits, which
Yes.
are controversial, are a flashpoint. But too much coziness builds up over time. People get
Complacency.
entrenched. And if you look at some of the Chicago aldermen now under federal indictment, facing federal prosecution, one of them has been on our city council for 49 years.
Oh my God.
There was recently the top ranking legislator in the state of Illinois, the Democratic majority leader in the House of Representatives. He was not indicted, but had to step down in a scandal because many of his close associates are under federal prosecution now in a big corruption scandal. He had been in charge of the state legislature for 36 years,
And you can't be in there for that length of time without a certain amount of corruption. You may have gone into it with good intent, but somewhere on the line, those waters are going to get murky.
Generally so, generally so. And if somebody never uses email or the phone, that's actually a tip-off.
They've got something to
hide.
They've
got a system.
Yes.
They've got a system. They know how to avoid getting nailed. And here is the sad thing, Sarah. In Chicago and in Illinois and in places like Philadelphia and New York City, the aim is simply to not get caught.
Yes.
It's not to do good. It's to do what you want to do once elected and to not get caught. And then the corollary, and this is important, also to represent, to do the kabuki theater, right? To make it appear as though you are taking care of the public's business, mouthing the right bromides. And we have an awful lot of that here, particularly around, and I should not ignore mentioning this. I go at this rather forcefully in my book. This whole notion of systemic racism is actually racist itself.
Right.
What you have is now an elected political elite, largely of color, in these large US cities. And what they say is Black people are not capable.
Right.
Black people cannot succeed because once in this nation there was slavery and there were other structures which discriminated against minorities, and there certainly were. And it's horrible that that happened, but now it's 2021. It's a new age. And to say that people are not capable of something because of the sins of the past is all wrong.
Yes.
But this becomes a box to check.
Yeah.
You have to show you're woke. So if Black students are failing disproportionately in our public schools, if there is disinvestment in Black neighborhoods because it's too dangerous, there's too much crime, everything is explained by our politicians, including our mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot. Her go-to explanation for everything is systemic racism. It becomes a way of failing to set the bar higher. It becomes a way of saying, we don't think those people are actually capable, so we need to make excuses. And I can tell you, looking at the zeitgeist right now in the United States, there is a rising up against this, and even moderates are getting sick of the systemic racism shtick. And they're starting to say, you know what, in 2021, even with COVID, even with crime in our big cities, you make your life what it is.
Right.
It's up to you.
Yes. And so I can't remember who it is,
and they understand that.
Is that we are all part of the human race. And if we look at it, everybody with equal opportunity, despite the color, economic status, sexuality, religion, or anything else, then we would actually see a society that can be that beautiful melting pot of cultures thrive. But while we divide and label and diminish, all we're going to see is low results. Low expectation gets low expectation. So if we actually look to being higher, and I mean, as you said, how many people of color right now have stepped into these high positions, but also what's coming up of how many people of color in the past were not even written about because they were of color, but look at what they created, look what they invented, look what they were capable of doing. It's the white man's suppression of them for their own ego and their own self-interest, rather than accepting that behind the person's exterior skin, everybody is capable of something great if we water those seeds and allow them to grow.
There's a great duality in a city like Chicago or New York. There's greatness in our DNA here. It is still evident if you walk around in the architecture, in the neighborhoods, in the public park systems, in the culture. I mean, the jazz and the blues, right? I've been enjoying, and I love music. I've been enjoying live music back here in Chicago, and to see the huge crowds turning out for public concerts again, the joy of the performers to be performing and of the audience to be there. But then you think too of what's been invented here. You think of the intellectual capital, the economic capital. There's so much that happens in cities like this that I don't subscribe to the fatalist analysis, which says, the cities are done, stick a fork in them. First of all, we still have 2.7 million people here. It's 1 million less than back in the year 1950, but it's still a lot of people can't go or don't want to go. And we cannot just abandon our cities and our sort of collective consciousness. We can't let that go, because
but that's also that's part of the mentality of people today. Oh, it's broken, just throw it away.
Actually,
it's waste. We're just we've become so wasteful, and over everything we do and everything that we are. It's that what happened to, there is a problem, let's fix it. I'll just buy something new, I'll just go somewhere new. No, you're going to go into another problem there, because the whole mentality has become about, just chuck it away, I don't want to deal with it. You're going to have to deal with it, because everywhere is broken, and we need to learn how to put it back together. But it requires all of us to step up. It requires everyone to step up. It requires our governments to change its practices, the electoral to change its practice, our education to change the way they're educating, to actually make it enticing for a kid to go to school, to treat them all equally. If they can't read at a certain level because it hasn't been taught in the home, don't degrade them because they can't. Entice them to want to learn to read, right? For the kids that have been left behind, don't just leave them behind. They're just going to be a statistic. Pick them up and help them forward. It's up to us as a community to do this. And if you love your Chicago, if you love any of your cities, it's not up to just the government and it's not me. No, every single person has to be a part of the solution.
Couldn't agree more.
A lot has to be fixed. A lot has to be overhauled. A lot has to be addressed. And the more and more that we have the sweet talk or the avoidance, the more the problem is going to be. And, I think let's turn it right back to when a family gets pregnant, that birth of that child, the security of that home. Is the money coming into the home? Is there a job there? Are they being encouraged to spend time with their child, or is everybody having to work 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet? Let's go right to the root of the problem. And it may take a while, it may take even another generation to fix the problem. But if we show the children and we show the parents of the children that we're there for them, then we're going to see a better society down the road. And the government needs to step up and support that instead of penalizing.
It's a life-changing event to
Yeah.
become a parent.
Yep.
This is one of the things I learned. And for a lot of people, your politics also slowly start to shift a little bit when you become a parent, perhaps also when you become a property owner of a residential property, when you're paying property taxes, and then you discover that your city's public schools, for which you are paying some proportion of your taxes, are not a viable option for your children, not because you have impossibly high standards, but just because you
they have low standards.
Yeah. You have reasonable standards, and the public schools in your city are still a non-starter. You start to wonder about things. I also think that the political analysis, and this is going to sound like a horrible thing, but I notice that people who don't have children sometimes just don't get it when it comes to the concerns that people have about crime, about public safety, about the tone and tenor of public life, even about the environment. I think that it just changes your perspective. And actually, I think people who don't get it about the responsibility of parents, if you've been a parent, maybe you're one of those who ignored your duties and your child turned out poorly or not so great. Well, then you know that deep in your heart. But I think most parents see it as a life-changing, life-affirming experience. Here you are now, responsible for the upbringing and even intellectual development of this being that has just landed on, inside your house. It's a huge, huge thing. And I mean, when you talk about something concrete, like the introduction of new vocabulary words, right? Or mathematics skills, right? Or language skills. These are all things that are seeded at a very early age. We know from the experts and from our own experience that the first 3 years are utterly crucial. How much are you talking to your toddler, and how often is the hockey game on instead?
How much are you reading to them? How much are you introducing them to the beautiful graphics and words? How much are you listening to them, even if they're gobbledygook as a baby, paying attention to them, right? Interaction again.
There's actually a whole body of research on the importance of how parents respond to children when they have a need or a concern or want to talk.
Right.
And if you ignore them, things turn out worse for them when they're older. And, I asked Latasha Fields about that on the South Side in her home. She's a Black woman from Louisiana who moved up to Chicago. She started out as a 17-year-old single mother on welfare, working in Burger King for $4.50 an hour, and ended up running her own real estate company by the age of 21.
Wow.
She turned things around, and she has raised 4 children, and she lives on the South Side with her husband, Ron, who's a barber. They're good people. I sat at their kitchen table and drank sweet tea with them. And I asked her about that, well, what about the explanation we hear that sometimes it's hard for parents to be there with their children because each parent is working 2 jobs. And she said, yeah, I hear that a lot, but the question I have is, whose children are they? Are those society's children?
Yeah.
Those are your children. So you've got to figure it out somehow or other. Now, if you've got a family network, then that's going to help, right?
Yes.
There are a lot of grandmothers who are heroes and aunts and uncles too, who step in, and that goes to something that's timeless, which is the importance of the clan, right?
Yes.
So we need to remember about those ties, and we need to remember about the importance of community, which
Yeah.
you've been stressing greatly. That same elderly neighbor lady
Hmm.
who would whip your kid's bottom when
Yeah.
they misbehaved would also provide after school care
Yes.
if she was around and
Right.
you had to be out of the house
Mm.
working. And those extended social networks are breaking apart more and
Yeah.
more. And that goes back to a number of the things we've discussed, the way our life is now,
Mm.
the fear in the big
Yeah.
cities, the atomization of lives, right, which is engendered by this fantastic technology that we all say we couldn't live without and
Although we
probably
managed to
couldn't.
beforehand.
I know. That's another sign of incipient fogeydom. Let's not go there. I remember before there were cell phones. Yeah, I know. I know. I
We
know.
used this thing called dial a phone, or we wrote a letter, or we went and knocked on the
Right.
door.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Writing
think what we've,
letters.
what we've also forgotten about is that you might not be able to give the quantity of time, but it is the quality of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And,
Mm-hmm.
if it's that hour a day that is absolutely undivided on your child to let them know, you may have to be working a lot, but that hour is theirs. And you're
Mm-hmm.
there to read to them, to listen to them, to nurture them. And they know they cherish that hour. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
they also learn that one has to work in life, but it's all about, let's not make the excuses, let's find the solution. And the old adage saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Let's go
Mm-hmm.
back to that way of thinking, and let's, as a community, step up, you know, step up
Mm-hmm.
and help one another, because the other way is not working.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's what I find myself thinking now.
Mm. Well, we've covered a great deal, and I know we could probably cover some more, but how do people get hold of the book? Where did they get hold of it? And how did they get hold of you?
Sure. The book, What Next Chicago? Notes of a Pissed Off Native Son, is available online only at Amazon and also at Barnes and Noble online. So if people go to either site and simply enter What Next Chicago, or if you go to Google and enter What Next Chicago, you will find the Amazon page right
Mm.
away. So it's easy to find online. To get a hold of me, people can go to my website where there is a contact a contact form, and there's additional writing, long form essays about how to make cities more viable. And it's called chicagoschooled.com, and schooled is with a K. So chicagoschooled.com with a K.
Right. And the graphics that you have there on your site, it's
Yeah.
just wonderful. Is that a local artist?
It is. That is a street mural on
Mm.
the masthead, and I love that. Thank you.
Mm.
It's very colorful. Great art. And it's interesting because when you look at that picture, it conveys a lot to me about the hope and wisdom
Mm.
residing within the Black community and the creative spirit and energy.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to see the picture to understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. Please go to
But
the site
yes,
and
that is
see it,
from a
because it's worth
street.
seeing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's from a street mural in the Auburn Gresham neighborhood on the south side.
I think
And it
if
was one
everybody
of my
could take
first days.
one of your
No, go
stays
ahead.
back. No, I was just saying, if everybody could have an ounce of your enthusiasm for your city, an ounce of
Mm,
it, and just,
mm,
kind of go, okay, I'm going to shift my perspective. I'm going to step up and do something. I'm going to change my thinking. I'm going to change my approach. If everybody just pivoted a little bit, everybody, imagine what changes could happen.
Well, let me share one last thing with you. It goes right to that. A national talk show host just the other night asked me essentially, don't you really think there's no chance that the political reforms will change Chicago? I mean, the attempts have been going on for years. Isn't it about time to stick a fork in
Mm.
Chicago? It's done. And my answer to that is, there are success stories everywhere in this
Yeah.
city. And we need to shine a light on those stories, and we need to support those people.
Yes.
In the end, although politics, here's what I think, Sarah, politics and policy matter a great deal, but there is a land that is either before or beyond politics,
Yeah.
that goes to the personal. It goes to how people rise to the challenge of being a spouse, of being a parent, of being a worker at a time when continuing education is almost a necessity, right?
Yes.
So it's up to us in the end. And a better politics and better public policy is merely an outgrowth of making a better effort to begin with as people, as parents, as children, as clan members, and as citizens.
Let's look at Detroit quickly. It almost became a graveyard and became, a very dysfunctional city. And then people fought back for it. And they fought back for it, and they invested in it, and they supported it, and they stepped up to it. And it's, it's changed around altogether. Please don't throw people, don't throw communities, don't throw cities away just because it's in trouble. That is one of the biggest problems that we have in society today. Oh, I can't be bothered with it. I'll just get something new. I'll get a new friend. I'll get a new job. I'll get a new government. No, we don't look at that. We got to look at, how do we resolve the problem? How do we step up and be part of the solution? And how do we fix things that it serves everybody? Because if we don't get into the repair system, where everything is going to be broken and there's going to be nothing new to be had.
I think innovation is of the essence here.
Yes.
And face it, cities, like societies, are organic creatures, right? I mean, they literally shed body parts and grow new parts.
Yes.
They're like mutant creatures, but they're mutant creatures that, that can be lovable.
Yeah.
And so we just need to embrace that change, that shedding of what doesn't work, and that growth of new parts and new ways of living and producing and learning that do work for us. So
and then everybody's got to step up. It's everybody's problem. I don't care if you're rich and millennial and I haven't got any kids and I don't know what you're talking about, but your car may be the one that's getting jacked, right?
Yeah.
And because you weren't willing to step up and look at the problem, and if you lipped that person as they were hijacking your car, you might not come out of it alive, where you could have been part of the solution to prevent that problem in the first place. So everybody's in this pot. So everybody's got to step up.
I agree. There's a lot to do. I think it's important to continue to focus attention on our cities. I think that as cities go, so goes the nation.
Yes.
And let's also, and there are scholars and writers and journalists doing this right now. Let's look at the cities that are succeeding.
Yes.
The ones that are attracting population. Why is that happening?
And what
why
can
are
we
the
learn
winners?
From it?
Yeah. Why are the winners winning? Why are the losers losing population? You cannot shy away from that analysis.
What's the definition of madness? Is to keep doing the same thing, expecting the same results. If it's not working, change it. Change it. Learn from other people who have done it better. Adopt it, adapt to it, but willing to change. Because if you don't change, you're going to have more of the same.
I think it's smart to keep an eye on New York City. Their next mayor will be a guy who seems to represent change, Eric Adams. He's a moderate centrist Democrat. He supports police and accountability at the same time. He supports school choice. He's diametrically opposite the guy who's taken New York City almost down the drain for the last several terms, Mayor Bill de Blasio. So I think it's very interesting and encouraging that voters in New York City chose Eric Adams from a wide field, including many candidates who were far to the left of him. And it's primarily people of color in boroughs like Queens,
Mhm.
and the Bronx, who are tired of crime,
Right.
who don't espouse the same dismissive bromides as the white progressives on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's those people who helped propel him into a likely win. He won the Democratic primary a few months ago, and next month, in just a few weeks, he will face off against the Republican primary winner, Curtis Sliwa, and probably Eric Adams will be the next mayor of New York when it's all over. So I would keep an eye on New York City, and we need to throw away old stale ways of
Yes.
thinking and governing
Yes.
in our largest northern cities in the US. It is the northern cities that are stuck. It is actually the southern cities that are open for business and that are taking care of business for the citizenry. So we have some reckoning to do up here in our older cities.
Yeah.
Chicago, first and foremost.
And as I said, folks, it's not about throwing things away. It's about finding ways to heal, to fix.
Mhm.
And that means everybody's got to step up. And that starts with, who you elect. Are they really there to work for your city? Are they really there to work for the people and the community of that city? And how do you get behind them in helping them succeed? Not stepping back and waiting for them to succeed, helping them succeed. So it's who you elect, how you support, and how you step up in your own community.
Mhm.
That's where the change happens. Thank you so much. This has been very enlightening. I mean, you're talking about Chicago, but really you could be addressing many cities in many countries. And we know the politics has gone wrong. We know that there's misrepresentation out there. We know that we have to get with the times. We know that things are failing. So, it's not throw up your hands and go, oh, to hell with it. No, it's roll up your sleeves and look at what we can do about it. So thank you so much for sharing here today, Matt.
Sarah, it was a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for having me on.
My pleasure. And again, the site is
chicagoschooled.com, schooled with a K.
SKOOLED.com, and your
That's
social
right.
media and everything is there as well. Please look at the site, just even for the mural. It's beautiful, but all the other articles and everything have there, and the book, because the book you reference a great deal. You may not be from Chicago, but I guarantee an awful lot of what you've written about is probably reflected in your own state or your own community. And we've just got to stop turning a blind eye and go, la, 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 nothing to do with me. It's everything to do with you. And that means every single person has to participate in finding the resolution. So thanks very much, Matt. Until next time, folks. Bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. You will hear many, many shows here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. We have new shows for you out every week. Just find them on our podcast or What's New. If you feel that you have something to share that makes a difference in the lives of others, or you too feel that you could be a host, please contact me at info@selfdiscoverymedia.com and we will be glad to speak with you. Have a wonderful day.